Well, good afternoon to all you people that are tuning in, and specifically to the people who are here today. It's really great to see an audience on a Sunday afternoon coming out. Why? Because the most popular sport, literary sport, taking place these days is storytelling. Not everybody knows about that yet. That's why we're doing this with a live stream, hoping that you'll get the idea of what's going on and find out what storytelling is all about. It's really quite strange. I find that in Victoria, they've got a guild. They've got one up in Nanaimo, and they got a storytelling group up in Parksville, Qualicum. What happened to Duncan? I don't know. There's a lot of stories here that just walking down the street, you could write the story. But, you know, that's just the community. It's a wonderful place. I just sort of, it's kind of funny because tonight at 7 o'clock, we're also doing a comedy situation, which is going to be taking place. So I'm going to be hearing all different kinds of stories all the way along, all variations of what humor and thought-provoking is all about. So it's going to be a fun time. Today is our inaugural. We're going to be trying to do this. It's the last Sunday of each month, except we have to, fourth Sunday, right. We have to talk about December. We'll work one out for that one, just because we're doing a pantomime. That's fun. If you've ever been to pantomime, you should come see it. It's the Shawinigan Players do it every year, and we've been doing some theater here just to sort of branch off from music, and it really is quite fun. If you can imagine, just while I got your attention, if we take these chairs here, and there's 3 feet on the front of this where we can drop the stage down to a foot. The other one is 2 feet. So then we take these chairs and we rake it up here just like it is on the other side, and the play takes place down in the middle. It's called In a Thrust, and it's a wonderful way. It's more like being a fly on the wall, right? But even when we're doing Hamlet coming up, it's going to be done here. We're going to do it again with the 2 sections and make it all work. Oh, by the way, these are our Freda stairs. See, there's a generation here that would get that. Sometimes I do that at the punk rock, and they just look at me, what? Who's Fred? But anyway, you're here for the... Good, have a seat. We're just about to start. Lee Porteous from Victoria. We've tried this once before, but COVID got in the way again, as it always did. And but we all found ways to get going on with our lives, right? And I'm so glad we're able to do this again, that they reached out and said, yeah, let's give it another kick at the can. I'm all over this. Please, give her a warm welcome. Lee Porteous.
Marva, Jennifer, Margaret. This one?
Or we can move that one up. Like.
Yeah. I wasn't sure what to do. Can I move it? Thank you. This is Ted Cadillac. I think it's turned on yet, but thank you. His job is to make us sound intelligent and look beautiful. An easy task with the group we've got today. So Margaret, Jennifer, and Marva and I are grateful to Longevity John for the opportunity to tell stories here and for his determination to keep the lights on at the showroom. We encourage you all to make a donation to help him do that. I know the people in the room have already done that, but there will be people who are seeing us from their homes and at any time, because you can tune into this. This is the first in a series of storytelling events, as you've heard, through November, we thought. And your tellers today will be storytellers from the 3 adult storytelling groups on the island, the Victoria Storytellers Guild, the Around Town Tellers from Nanaimo, and the Mid-Island Storytellers from Parksville, Qualicum Beach. We acknowledge with respect the Cowichan First Nation, the largest single First Nation in BC, on whose traditional territory this event is taking place and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Now, you're here for crimes and misdemeanors. And I can say that when the gals and I were talking, it came up that we knew stories that involve crime. I mean, Jack and the Beanstalk involves a crime. Think about that. But then it came around that some of us have actually committed some crimes and misdemeanors. And we thought about the stories that we have about that. Now, we don't want you to think that we are mavens of crime, but each of us is going to tell a story from our own lives about our shady behavior, you might say. Yes. And one that it doesn't involve us. And storytellers will tell you that every story we tell is true. and some of them actually happened. And of those, I'll let you be the judge. So our first teller is Marva Blackmore from Parksville, Collicum. And Marva started her group up there, I think, in 2010.
Somewhere around there.
So about 13 years it's been going. And one of the first principles of it was to bring to the island professional storytellers, mostly from away. But also, some of us are so good, we've been on her stage too. Come on, Marva.
Thank you. Let the guy who makes it sound good get back there. Yeah, I was a little more sure-footed 13 years ago, but I also did a lot of traveling. One of the most useful but least utilized resources in the traveler's oasis is the public library. And even in a strange land, you'll kind of go, well, I can't read the books. No, you can't read the books. But there are 3 things that a public library offers you no matter what country you're in. First, free internet. Second, usually international newspapers for free. And the third thing, public washrooms. Always in the public library. I was in Maastricht, Holland. It was August, and I was out sightseeing, and I needed to use the public washroom. And the only place I could think of was the library. Now, the library in Maastricht, Holland is, well, it's nothing to write home about. It doesn't have a rare collection of books. It doesn't have soul-searching architecture. But it does have public washrooms, free public washrooms. I walk into the library, and there's a guard standing there. And I kind of look at him and I go, bathroom? And he points in that direction. So off I go into the washroom. There are 3 cubicles in this washroom, but they're like 3 separate rooms. There's no way over them, no way under them. They're just 3 separate rooms. I pull on the handle of one of them. It's clocked. I go to the other one. I pull a little harder. It's locked. I'm in Europe. This is the land of pay toilets. Okay, I reach into my pocket and I pull out what change I have, and I start measuring that change against a slot that I see in the door. I put in the first coin, nothing. The next coin, nothing. I got some German coins here, let's try them. Nothing. All I succeed in doing is filling up the slot and jamming it with coins. Okay, I must be doing something wrong. So I move to the next cubicle. Coin, coin, coin. Same thing, the door won't open and the coins have jammed up whatever that is to get in. So I walked out and I talked to that guard, the one that's standing at the door. And I said, how does one get into the bathroom? In his staged, loud voice, you need a handle. Whoa, whoa. And every head in the library turns. I said, where do I get the handle? And he points to the circulation desk. Of course. So I go over to the circulation desk, and yes, there are 6 handles laying on the circulation desk. Aha! I reach over to grab one, and I hear, "Nicht so schnell!" I think she just said, "Not so fast." And then I get a lecture in Dutch, and then a lecture in English, because if you've traveled in Holland, you know all Dutch are multilingual. They're born multilingual. So I need to have permission to take that handle. I need to give her a library card. I don't have a library card. Well, after much thinking and discussing, I promise upon everything I own that I will return the handle. And so she hands me the handle, and I go into the bathroom. I go to that one stall I have not yet jammed with coins, and I put the handle in, and I turn it, and it opens. Hallelujah. So I walk into that cubicle, stall, room, and the door shuts behind me. I am in the darkest room I have ever been in my entire life. I can't see my hand in front of my face. There must be a light in here somewhere. And I reach around on the wall, and I feel something that feels like it might be a light switch. I click it a couple of times. No difference. It's the same darkness. But now my eyes are beginning to adjust to that darkness. And up in the corner, I see it's a little black light. I thought, well, that must be part of the lighting system, but it couldn't be the light. Meanwhile, things have become very urgent. So using the back of my legs, I back up to the facilities, I deal with the problem, and now it's time to leave the cubicle. And there's no handle. I feel on the door, and there's a slot. A slot for that handle that I left on the outside of the door. Oh my, what am I going to do? Well, in good tourist fashion, I scream, I holler, I yell, I bang on the door, and finally, some very nice person opens the door for me. I then grab that handle so I have it in my hand. And the light now is coming in from the bathroom part, and I still can't see any light in there, except for that little black light up in the corner. So I walk out, and I talk to the security guard, and I say, you know, there's no light in the bathroom, in the cubicles. Oh, yes, there is. No, there isn't. Turns out that little black light is the light. And the reason that they're using that light is to keep the drug users from finding their veins. So I thought, okay, now I know, because at first I thought I was going to have to go get a light switch from the librarian. But anyway, I thanked him, and I said, you know, you also cannot find the toilet when you're in that bathroom. And he kind of looked at me with, too bad, lady. So I walked back to the circulation desk. I put the handle back, but there's a moment when I think, maybe I'll just keep it. And that way, if I find another bathroom with this problem, I'll have a handle. But it's heavy, and I'm traveling light, and I did make a solemn promise to return the handle, which I did. But now I know my way around Dutch toilets.
I'm sorry, Ted. Is there a way to? Oh, you're on my trail. Good. Okay, that's all right. Good, thanks. You know, in the Nanaimo tellers, if you touch the microphone, you may never be invited back again. Yeah, that'd be great, thanks. So I hope that the coins that you left were enough to cover the repairs to their door. Those Canadians, they don't know a thing about technology. Anyway, our next teller is Jennifer Ferris, and she's from the Victoria Storytellers Guild, although many other places too. And I was looking back, and I've got various bios from Jennifer, and one it says 20 years of storytelling. Then I look at another 25, another was 35, and I'm thinking, how old is she? And I don't know how long with Victoria Storytellers Guild, but she's one of the backbone of the group. And so always with good advice about what stories to tell and how to tell them, and very kind about that as well. So she's up here to tell one of those stories that I told you about that is true, whether it happened or not. And I'm not sure. She'll have to tell you whether it did.
Well, in case you're wondering about my age, I'm just the right age. So the story that I'd like to share with you, well, it happened to someone. I'm not sure if it is true or not, because it comes from a book of folk tales called The Stone Horseman, and they're tales collected in the Caucasus, that stretch of land between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Now it is divided up between South Russia, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. It is a mountainous place, huge peaks cut with gorges and deep valleys, cut by torrential rivers. People have lived there since ancient times. Tiny villages teetering on the edge of a cliff, or a village in the deep valley. These settlements were so far apart in ancient times that more than 50 languages were spoken in that place. So little did each village have with another. The story I'm going to tell you concerns a young man of Armenian descent. His name was Arman. His father had been a great warrior. He had fought for the Khan, and when he laid down his sword, he went into business. I'm afraid he was not quite so successful in business as he had been in battle. He was an honest man, and he expected that others would treat him with honesty. What a fool. He went into business with a group of men, and they stole from him, they took his goods, they took his gold, and left him with nothing. And so when he died, all that was left in the house for his son was one silver dagger. But Arman looked at the dagger and he said, I'm going to take this dagger to the nearest town, I'm going to sell it, and then I will begin my life of adventure. And so off he went. He left his home, and he walked for many days on narrow, flinty, steep paths, taking him over bare mountain peaks. He could hear the wind howling through the peaks and burying itself in the dense, deep forests below him, places where hardly any human foot had walked. On the third day, he met a merchant coming in the opposite direction, and as custom demanded, they had to stop and pass the time of day together. The merchant saw that silver dagger. It had a beautiful embossed handle. Saw the dagger in the belt of the young man. Oh, the merchant wanted that dagger. His mouth watered looking at that dagger. "Young man," he said, "I will give you this purse of gold coins if you will give me your dagger." Well, Aran thought that he might get more for the dagger in the town, and he was a better businessman than his father. He said, "Thank you, that's a kind gesture, but I'm going to go to the nearest town, to the marketplace, and I think that I'll get quite a bit more than just a purse of 5 gold coins." But oh, how that merchant wanted that dagger. "Tell you what," he said, "let's have a contest." Aran's eyes brightened, for he loved games and contests. "What?" he said. "What?" "Well," said the merchant, "you tell me a story that is incredible, astonishing, fantabulous. If you can convince me to cry out aloud, 'That is a lie,' then you can keep your knife and I'll give you this purse of coins. However, if I remain silent, then you will give me that silver dagger." Well, Aran had grown up in a house of story. When they were alive, his parents, his grandparents, his aunts and uncles, even the cook, the stable boy, and the goose girl, they each had a story to tell. "I will tell a story," he said. "You listen." When I was quite younger than I am now, probably 9 or 10 years old, I had 90 hives of bees. I loved my bees. Every morning I would open the hives and they would fly away to do their busy bee business, and I would count each one. And in the evening when the bees returned to their hives, I counted them one by one back into their hives to make sure that all was safe. One evening I noticed that a bee was missing. Now, among my many bees, there was a bee who was blind and a bee who was lame, and immediately I knew that it was the lame bee who had not come home that night. And I decided that I would go out and look for my bee, so I mounted the bee that was blind, and off we flew in search of the lame bee, and we traveled for many days. Oh, I saw many sights. But at last, we found the bee that was lame. He had been captured by a farmer, put to the plough, that he would cultivate the farmer's garden. Well, I demanded the return of my bee, and I insisted that I should be paid for the labor that my bee had done on his farm. Well, you know how tight-fisted farmers can be, but at last he agreed that we would share the harvest of the field that my bee had ploughed. In that field, there were 6 watermelons. I took 3. I loaded them onto the back of the bee that was lame, and then I mounted the blind bee, and off we flew on our way back home. Well, I got almost to our village. I got to the wall of my father's house. You had to go through a gate to get into the compound, and I realized that the watermelons were so large they would not fit through the gate. What was I to do? Well, of course, you know, I had to cut those watermelons in half. So I took the knife, not this silver dagger, another knife. I took the knife and I cut the first watermelon into 2 pieces, and as those 2 halves fell apart, I noticed in one a seedling that grew and grew into a tall sapling, into a tree, until before my eyes there was a full-grown nut tree. Well, I was 9, 10 years old, loved to climb. I was up that tree trunk, through the branches, to the very crown of the tree. And it was there that I discovered a pitcher filled with sweet, creamy butter. A whole jug of butter. Oh, how I love butter. I took that pitcher down to the ground and I pushed my hand into the soft butter that I might grab a handful. But when my hand was in the pitcher, I felt something. It felt like a chain. And I yanked on that chain, and I hauled on that chain, and I hauled, and out of that pitcher of butter came 40 camels, laden with gold. Oh, I thought, how pleased my father's going to be. I will restore his wealth. But at that moment, what should happen? We were set upon by a band of robbers who took the camels and the gold, including the gold pieces in that purse you hold in your hand, merchant. No, no, that's a lie, proclaimed the merchant. And so Aran walked away with his silver dagger and the purse of gold coins. And he went upon his way, and the merchant went upon his way. And that night he stopped in a village and went into the inn, and he drank copiously. And he talked non-stop. He was so garrulous, and he told the story of how that boy had cheated him out of his purse of gold coins. Well, that story had wings, and it flew from mouth to ear, from ear to mouth, from mouth to ear, from ear to mouth, until it came to the attention of the Khan, the great Khan who ruled over that region of the Caucasus. When he heard the story, he said, well, he might get the better of a merchant. You see, the king thought he was the most intelligent man in the whole world, that he was the most educated. Oh, he might get the better of a merchant, but it would be a different story if he came to see me. And so the Khan sent his soldiers out across the land. Bring that young man to me, said the Khan. It didn't take them long to find him. They dragged him to the city. They took him into the palace and brought him before the Khan. There was the Khan sitting on his throne with his wazir beside him, and advisors and soldiers, and the chief executioner. The Khan addressed Aman. Young man, you think you're so clever. You think you're such a wit. Well, you'll never get the better of me. I want you to tell me a story. Tell me a story that is incredible, unbelievable, fabulous. If you can convince me to cry out, that's a lie, then you can keep the dagger and your little bag of gold coins. And what else? Oh, I know. This golden ball. Everyone in the room gasped, for they all knew that the golden ball was the Khan's most treasured possession. Oh, how he loved to hold it in one hand, in two hands, to throw from one hand to another. How he loved the smoothness of it, the weight and the heft of it. Oh, he pressed the coolness of that golden ball against his cheek on a hot summer's day. He pressed it warm against his heart on a cold winter's night. The Khan loved that golden ball more than anything in the world. If you can convince me that your story is a lie and that I will cry out, then you can keep your dagger, the purse of gold coins, and you can have this golden ball, but you will not succeed. And if my words are true, and you do not succeed, then your head will be separated from your shoulders. And the head executioner squared his shoulders and gave a big smile. But I will be fair, said the Khan. I will give you 30 days. 30 days to come up with a story, and then come back and we shall see what we shall see. The young man got up and left the audience chamber of the Khan. He was furious. That man is abusing his power. Well, our friend Aman, he was as clever as he was handsome. His cleverness took him to the best potter in the city, where he ordered up a bowl, a pottery bowl, big enough to hold 40 pounds of gold. On the appointed day, he returned to the palace, his bowl under his arm. He was taken into the great audience chamber. There was the Khan and the Wazir and his ministers and the soldiers and the chief executioner. "Oh, you're here," said the Khan. "What's the bowl for?" "Oh, you'll see," said Aran, and he put it down beside him. "Well, begin your story, and be prepared to lose, young man." "I am ready. I am ready." "My father was a good and honest, brave man. He fought in your armies. And when he was too old to wield his sword, he became a merchant. He was a man of dignity, a man that you could trust, and he thought that all others were like him. Indeed, they were not. He went into business with a group of men, and they cheated him, and they stole from him. And among those men, O Khan, was you. You stole 40 pounds of gold from my father, and I want it back." "That's a lie," proclaimed. A gasp shifted through the room, from this side, around, and that. And the head executioner, his shoulders slumped, for there would be no amusement today. Well, the king knew that he had lost the contest. "Well, you can keep your silly dagger, and you can keep your little puny bag of gold coins." Aran said, "You can give me the 40 pounds of gold or that golden ball you hold in your hand." Oh. The Khan held up his ball and he thought about that 40 pounds of gold. Gold ball, 40 pounds of gold. Gold ball, 40 pounds of gold. He knew that that was all he had in the treasury. He would be bankrupt. And so, somewhat reluctantly, he handed the golden ball to the young man. And so Aran left the palace with his dagger, his purse of gold coins, and the ball of solid gold. And he went upon his way to begin the adventure of his life. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And if that wasn't true, it should have been. So our next teller is Margaret Murphy, and she and her friend Lori here, they started the Around Town Tellers 16 years ago in Nanaimo, down at the Philosopher's Cafe, was it?
It was the
Coyote Cafe. And that's all I'm going to say, because you're ready, and I want to hear this story. I think I saw a part of this story, and I was just astounded, so I'm certainly glad I'm going to hear your treatment of it.
Thanks, Lee. Thank you. Thank you, Lee, and thank you all. Thanks for coming out here to listen to stories. And I too went rogue this afternoon, and this isn't a story about me, but it is about another fierce older woman. And I was watching a Knowledge Network interview, and this beautiful 80-something-year-old elegant woman was being interviewed, and they said, What has happened, Madame Alice? What has happened? You have over 800 films to your credit. Where are they? Ah, she said, that is a wonder. And Madame, your name, we don't know you. How is that? Ah, she said, another wonder. Well, this afternoon, I would like to recognize and remember Alice Guy Blaché. Guy is spelled G-U-Y. We would say Guy, but in France, where she was born, it's Guy, and her married name was Blaché, B-L-A-C-H-E, aigu. It was March, the first day of spring, 1895. and Miss Alice was in a room with 200 other people in a grand salon in Paris, France. She was there to witness a film screening. Well, it wasn't so much the film that the Lumière brothers were there to introduce. Lumière meaning light. Auguste and Louis Lumière had been working in various photographic equipment and had come up with the cinématographie. Cinematography. So they were taking photographs and putting them through this motion picture camera and projecting them on a screen. It had never been done. 200 people were mesmerized. Later, much, much later, Miss Alice would think back to that night, and she said, "It was the birth of cinema." And I say, Miss Alice was not a doula or a midwife to cinema. Miss Alice was the matriarch. Who is this woman that after 800 films was relegated to the mists of time? Bébé Alice was born on July 1st, 1873 in Saint-Mandé, which is now a suburb of Paris. Her father, Émile, was a bookstore owner, and he shared the stories with his young family, and Alice really enjoyed them. It filled her heart, it filled her spirit. For several years, she also lived with a maternal grandmother in Switzerland, who happened to be a storyteller and a singer. The entire family moved to Paris, and when Alice was 17, her father passed away. So Alice had to contribute to the family funds, and she thought, well, I'm good with my hands, what can I do? And a friend said, yes, you play the piano. There's this new craft, this new secretarial job called stenography. Why don't you go and apply? Actually, there's an opening at Gaumont Studios. It's a photography studio. Check it out. And she did. She arrived and saw Monsieur Léon Gaumont, who looked at young Miss Alice and said, "This is an important company, miss. This is an important job, and you look very, very young." "Yes," she said, "but I'll get over it." And Monsieur Gaumont smiled and said, "Yes, sadly you will." But he loved the spirit, and he said, "You're hired." Over the next several months, Alice just dove into all that was camera, all that was motion picture, and discovered all the technicalities. And she watched these demonstration films that the studio was presenting to the public so that they could promote the motion picture camera. But the films, 1 and 2 minutes long, were static. They were boring. There was a man yawning at a window. There were horses crossing a courtyard. There were factory workers walking away from a building. Remember, Alice, the storyteller, said, "Oh, I know we can do better than that." So she came and cleverly asked Monsieur Gaumont, "I was wondering if I put together a little scene, just a scene, and I could show it to you. Perhaps we could incorporate it into your films. I mean, something that has connection with people, stories." "Oh," said Monsieur Gaumont, "that all sounds a little girlish to me, just a little silly. But I trust you, Madame Alice, so try it." Oh, Alice did more than try it. She dove in. She spent 16-hour days just getting her secretarial duties done at the beginning and end of the day, and then in the middle she would write scripts. She would select her friends to become actors. She would dress them up in various costumes, sometimes even staying up and sewing them herself. And she would ask for a cameraman to come in. They were her new baby. She showed them to Monsieur Gaumont, and he said, "Well, I'm speechless. Let's try it on our clients, our audiences. And they were delighted. Parisian audiences laughed, and her first film, 1896, La Fée aux Choux, is the cabbage fairy. And it was a delightful little 5-minute film, black and white, silent, that explored this couple who were trying to have a child. That was the beginning. Later that year, she was named head of production at Gaumont Studios. Free reign, Miss Alice. I would like to see more of those. This was not just a formal title. Oh, no. She took over all the writing, the organizing, the editing, the costumes, the whatever, even so far as asking those Lumière brothers for some of their sets. Within a few years, Gaumont Studios became well known for their short films. Oh, it was amazing. It was astonishing. She was part of an avant-garde movement. And there was a tiny problem. Miss Alice was a woman. And the resentment built within the community, largely of men in the motion picture industry, and also within some of the people who worked with her. How is it this young upstart is getting all this? She's head of production. There was even a small fire one day in one of the sets. Perhaps she'll go over budget and she'll lose her position. But no, she persevered. And as in life, so in films, different characters come and go. And a young man entered the scene, a Herbert Blanchet. Herbert was living in England and a cinematographer, and was hired by Gaumont Studios to come up and do some of the photography for Gaumont. Well, Miss Alice wasn't taken with this young Englishman, and he was quite taken with this young, starry woman of fire. She just raised her hand and said, "He's an Englishman." That says it all. But he pursued her. They went on a business trip to Germany, where she was producing and editing a film that he was shooting, and he won her over. In 1907, they were married. And as is the custom, a married woman needs to resign from her position then. And he said, "Well, that really is not an issue, because, my dear Alice, we're off to the United States. Gaumont has just hired me for the New York studio." Think of it, dear ones. Think of it. This young woman, 34 years old, new husband, new job, off to a country she didn't speak the language, starting all over. And she cleverly stopped and took a breath. Well, she took more than a breath, because she got pregnant the following year. But she stopped and said, "I still want to do what I do." The studios were in Flushing, New York. But Alice saw that they were so widely underused. These studios had massive amounts of space that she could use and reignite her passion, which she did. So she put together some short films and submitted them to the American public, who ate them up like it was Christmas cake. They loved her films, and she was starting to create longer and longer films. Some were westerns, some were military films, some were comedies, light films, and some were dramas. She even put together the Passion of our Lord Jesus Christ. And in 1912, when the African American actors were blacklisted, Alice said, "You come. I will put together a script, and we will do an entire film with only African American actors." 1912. It became so popular, she was able to accumulate quite a fortune, and then when she borrowed from the bank, she said, "I want bigger. I'm a woman of activity and action, and a woman of vision, and I want my own studio." She purchased and built a studio out in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And I wondered, Fort Lee, New Jersey? Well, yes, because that's where Mare Studio was, and Paramount, and United Artists, all the big names in this new revolution of motion picture studios. And there was Solax. Miss Alice was building her own state-of-the-art studio. Everywhere she went in the studio, she had these great banners put up. Be natural. She was specifically targeting the Solax players. Those were the actors that she had hired, her own company of actors. Be natural. I don't want the great drama on film. I don't want all that exaggeration. And I want the staff to be natural too. We work as a team. And Solax was very popular. And she brought in all manner of not only actors, but photographers, camera people, and women directors. The first American female director. Alice was the first woman to own and run a studio for the next over 100 years. And to this day, she becomes one of that rarity. And then in 1914, she thought, I'm missing the writing. I'm running this great business, but I'm missing the writing. I want to get back to writing, and then I can direct again. So she appointed her husband as president of the company. Sadly, Herbert did not have the vision that his wife did. And he made some very serious and poor investments. And slowly, the funds started evaporating. And those big companies that were there in Fort Lee said, we can't stay in New Jersey. What about the West? What about California? There's this place, have you heard of it? Hollywood. And they up and moved their companies to the West Coast. And Alice said, I cannot do that. Solax, I don't have the funds. And she continued to try to make a go of her company. In 1918, Herbert looked at his wife and said, I have to honor my calling. I'm actually not an administrator. I want to be on the other side of the camera, and I want to be an actor. And he packed up and left with a young co-star. And Alice said, what? And when faced with all these challenges, she does what she has always done, stops. But this time she became ill. It was the Spanish flu, and it stopped her for several months. And in 1919, a great roaring fire came through the studios at Solax. And she lost 90% of the buildings and contents. The rest had to be auctioned off to pay to the bank. And still, she said, what do? I now have 2 children, for Simone was joined by her brother Reginald. And now what do I do? So she stopped and thought, I'm going back home. I'm going back to what I know. She returned to France, to the south of France, to Nice, where her sister was living, and Gaumont had just opened a new studio. But Miss Alice was now almost 50. And she knocked on the door of many studios, and she said, no one is answering. And when she received the compilation of Gaumont Studios, the history of the studio, her films were partially listed, but with no credit to her. She went to see Gaumont and said, what has happened here? What has happened? My films aren't even listed, and nor is my name. And Gaumont looked at his former employee and said, oh, I had nothing to do with that compilation. And besides, Madame Alice, what does it matter? For the next few years, Alice thought, I need to regain my identity. Until her daughter Simone, who was now living with her, Maman, tell your story, write your truth. And she did. Through the 40s, when it was chaos in Europe, she wrote her memoirs and tried 9 different publishers to publish her work. No, they said, this doesn't ring true. For the next few years, Alice went about searching until she finally came to a place in the 50s where she thought, why do I keep searching for who I am with my films? I am right here. I am right here. And her daughter said she found great solace in nature and her great curious mind in the sciences and the news and in translation and writing stories. Her health began to decline, and Simone got a job back in New Jersey, and Alice followed her daughter. She did become ill and passed away in March 25th, 1968. And she's buried at Mary Rest Cemetery, just 20 miles from the Solac studio where it was so many years earlier. Now flash forward 50 years, and a woman named Pamela Green is looking through all this history of women in the cinema. Who was this Alice Guy Blaché? Has anyone heard of her? And she talked to producers and actors. She talked to any number of people. And she talked to a woman named Joan Simon, a curator at the Whitney, who said, I know her. And they collaborated and put together, after 10 years of research, a fabulous documentary called Be Natural, the untold story of Alice Guy Blaché. And, dear ones, fasten your seatbelts, because coming to a theater near you, yes, Pamela Green is putting together a biopic, a full-length feature honoring Alice Guy Blaché. We honor you, Alice, and we remember you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Margaret has developed a number of stories, like performance-length stories involving remarkable women. And so I would say to you, and you out in Zoom land, or I guess it's YouTube land, that you should, for a good time, call Margaret Murphy and ask for Georgia O'Keeffe. Anytime, gal. It's my turn to tell a story now, but one thing I thought I would just put out for you is there are 4 of us here, and 3 of the people that you're hearing put on workshops to train other storytellers, to do memoir writing and other coaching. I'm not going to tell you which 3, because you might guess me, which would be great, but actually not so. 2 of the people that you're hearing today have been presidents of our national organization, Storytellers of Canada, Contour de Canada. So you are actually listening here in the Duncan Showroom to storytelling royalty, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm so happy to be on the same stage with them. I love them. So it's my turn to tell a story now. And I'm actually quite glad that nobody in my family ever watches me tell stories, because I actually wouldn't want them to know about these. But I will trust you with these stories. I mean, nowadays, you would never think that I was ever a criminal, except maybe behind the wheel and over the Malahat, perhaps. But when I was 6 years old, was my first time I went to school. I didn't go to preschool, I didn't go to kindergarten, so I wasn't really familiar with that. And Nelson, where I came from, is a beautiful little town, and it was beautiful then, too. And what I remember is going to Central School, big brick building, and just up the street was a corner store right by the school. So I remember the day, too. It was a beautiful sunny day, sun coming through the fall leaves. And I went up to this corner store and I wandered around. I didn't have any money, so what was I doing there anyway? But there was a box of pink pearl erasers. Now, I love pink pearl erasers. They're beautiful. Just the shape of them, and they're perfectly designed for what they're designed to do. And there was a box of them, and they were all nestled together, nose to tail kind of thing, because you know how they're kind of parallelograms. And I wanted one. I wanted one of those erasers. Didn't have any money. I looked around and I took one. I took one and put it in my pocket. And I left, creeping out of there. Then I went back to school and I sat there with that hot eraser in my pocket. I knew it was wrong to steal. I knew that. It's so beautiful, though, that eraser. Anyway, so I decided it had to go back. So the next break, I went back up the street and into the store, and I was terrified. I was just probably trembling. I was so afraid they'd catch me now putting it back. So I got in there, and I snuck and I put it back and got back to school. Whew. And this is about the first that anybody has ever heard of that. But it reminds me of Martha Stewart, because she did the same thing when she was caught, too. She went back and was going to change some of the records and decided against it. She went to jail. I had a happier outcome. Now, the next year, when I was 7, I'm pretty sure I was 7, this is a really important thing, because in those days, a 7-year-old could be charged with a criminal offense. That was the age of your criminal responsibility. Nowadays, it's 12. But at that time, it was 7. And I can tell you this, and I'm relying on you folks not to turn me in, because if they were going to prosecute me for this, they could actually go back to the law of the time, and at 7, I could be charged. And the charge would be conspiracy to commit murder, actually. And I was always interested thinking back about this, because people think that children, they would never kill anybody. They don't understand about death and that. But I and my co-conspirators understood it perfectly. And the way it was in this neighborhood is there were the little kids and the big kids. I was the oldest of the little kids. All the other kids were 6, 5, 4. I don't think there were any 3-year-olds. But we kind of ran around together, and we'd go to different people's yards and, play on various things that we would do. In those days, we had so much freedom as children. And then there was the big kids, junior high and maybe even older. But there was one a little bit between the two, and her name was Leslie. Leslie was our problem. Leslie was a bully. She was a bully, and we all hated her. And we didn't know what to do about this bully. There was really only one thing. We had to kill her, and that was that. And we had a plan. I'm not sure who came up with the plan. Could have been me. I don't just remember. I'm willing to share the inspiration for it. But what we knew in those days, there was these bushes that had these white berries on them. We called them snowberries or popberries. And we would put them on the sidewalk and then stamp on them, and they'd pop. And we had all been told by all the adults, they're poisonous. Do not put them in your mouth. They are poison. Aha. So all of my troops fanned out and collected these berries, and we brought them to Tom's yard, Tom Littlewood, because it had fences, so nobody could really see what we were doing. So we had a big pot, and we're crushing them. We're crushing them to get that juice so we can kill Leslie. And so we did that, all of the group of us there. I remember vividly that day. But we had another problem, which was, how do we get her to drink it? None of us were friends enough with her to sort of mix it with her lemonade or anything like that. And so it died on the order paper. Leslie lives somewhere to this day, I'm sure, and none of us are facing criminal charges. But one of us could be. Now, fast forward again in my criminal career. This time the offense is mischief, you might call it that. So I was either 17 or 18, because it happened in May of 1968. And in those days, you would be charged with an adult if you were 18, but as a young offender at 17. And what this was grad time, and I was graduating. And I was quite shy, you know, and not very socially apt, you might say. And I was certainly not one of the cool kids. I mean, the cool kids, I would be there on Monday morning at school, and we would listen to all the parties they had, and who was drunk, and who did this, and all of the escapades they were in that I was not any part of. Nor, I'm not to say that there weren't others like me sitting there just listening to all these wonderful adventures, you might say, with the cool kids. And so graduation came along, and my aunt, very nicely, agreed to buy me an outfit for the banquet that we went to. I wasn't going to the dance, not even cool enough for that. Anyway, and I have pictures of it to this day. I look like I'm 50 years old. It was so old-fashioned. I was so humiliated going to that banquet with that. And, you know, I was not going to be part of any of the after parties or any of that kind of stuff. And I thought, I have to do something. I have to do something to step outside of this scaredy, shy, non-cool person. I have to stake out my territory. I have to do something bold. I have to do something criminal. I didn't think of it that way at the time. So what happened was, now I lived in Rosemont, which was quite a long way from the park at the lake. Now that park, if you've been to Nelson, you will have seen this, and there's a big bridge. They call it the Orange Bridge, much bigger than the bridges in Victoria, and a long way from where I lived. Once again, I had a plan. So what I did is I waited for my parents to go to bed, and then I went downstairs and I found a paintbrush, and a can of paint. It was pale blue, not what I envisioned for my remarkable breakout, but it was what I had. So then I set out from Rosemont in the dark, walking to the bridge. Every time I saw a pair of headlights coming, I dove for the ditch, because I thought any police officer finding a teenager with a can of paint on grad night is going to stop me, right? So I eventually, it took quite a while, I got down to the bridge. Now the bridge had the big abutments holding it, big cement ones. And they had just been repainted, so all of the previous graffiti was not there. It was a blank canvas. Now I didn't have a ladder. You can't imagine dodging into ditches carrying a ladder. So I had to reach up as high as I could, and anytime a car came by, back into the ditch, right? And I wrote, "Dear God, the very houses seem asleep." Now, if you know your Wordsworth, that's where it comes from how does it go? Westminster Bridge. Anyway, written on Westminster Bridge, and it's a line from that. And that's what I thought. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep. So I made my way home, also not caught, put the paint away and the brush away. And my mother in the morning said, "When did you get home? Don't lie." So I didn't. I said, 3:15. She didn't ask me anything else. Nothing else. Nothing else happened. Nothing happened. Nobody approached me. Nothing happened until after grad is long over, and we were reviewing our English lit stuff for the exams that happened at the end of the year, and they were reading this out. "The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all its mighty heart is sitting still." And every eye in that classroom looked at me, because I was the only one who would ever have thought to put Wordsworth on the bridge as graffiti. Now, I told this story to somebody, and they said, "I wonder if any of your schoolmates knew you did it." That had never crossed my mind. I thought, no, I never told anybody. Nobody ever spoke to me about it. But there was a reunion, and I connected with somebody I hadn't known since high school. And I asked her that, and she said, "We all knew it was you. But we're not squealers. We would never turn you in." And I thought, boy, I didn't know they knew me so well. So there it is. There's my history of crime. I'm in your hands now. All I can say is, shh. Don't bust me. So thank you very much. And thank you very much. It's so nice to have an audience here and to know that somewhere out there, people are going to be listening to all of us today too, and these wonderful stories that we've heard so far. So now we're going to give you only 10 minutes for a comfort break, you and those who may be watching us, and be back because there's 4 more. And let me tell you, I've heard at least 2 of them, and they are terrific. See you later.
Stories we have that we tell ourselves, stories that bend with time. Histories change like books on a shelf, pages that need a rewrite. All these words we leave behind. All these thoughts are chased away by bottles of wine and stories. Polish the past and let all the sorrow rust. Fill in the blanks, make up the end from parts of a book we loved once.
Sadness comes like a rolling fall out at sea, where silence is a drug from all these marshmallow walls closing on me. And I linger on these coarse and muted waters for a shining light to guide me back to harbor.
Show me what these tattered sails are for. And darling, break through the mist and guide me back to your shore. Shine a light, guide me in. Shine a light, guide me in. I'm so alone. Shine a light, guide me in. Shine a light, guide me in to the safety of your heart. The safety of your heart. If only all the rain was love, oh what a rain it would be. We could stand out in the streets, getting soaked to the bone in that mystery. But baby, it's just water falling free. And I still need someone to love me, darling. Won't you love me? Pour your love down on me. Pour your love down on me. I'm so alone. Pour your love down on me. Down on me. Show me how lovely your weather can be.
The calico beneath me, grass up to my knees, riding through the Black Bear Hills, a death song on the breeze. Redcoat riders on our trail, soon they rode us down, their fire sticks cracking, your blood spilled on the ground. The others prayed for enemies, children yet unborn, for all that moves upon the earth, they mourn. marching band. We are dancing for the buffalo, praying for this land. Well,
So are we good, Ted? All right. So welcome back to the second half. I'm always pleased when people have heard me tell and are back here still. But I remembered then you've got Margaret Murphy to hear again. Jennifer. Now, Margaret's Around Town Tellers, the next show is October 13th at 7:30, live or on Zoom. If you want to find more details, just put Storytelling Nanaimo in and their web page comes up first. So you've heard me talk about Margaret a tiny bit, but now almost all of the tellers in Nanaimo have gone through her workshop. She puts one on every year, Friday night and Saturday, in February usually. So that's often the launching pad for folks who are up on the stage there. And they couldn't have a better coach, I don't think. So let's bring Margaret back for her true story.
Thank you for that, Lee. My true story, yeah. Precious moments and a misdemeanor. It was December of last year, not that long ago. I was visiting family in Ottawa, my brother and his growing family. It was marvelous. It was unusual. There wasn't a flake of snow on the ground. December in Ottawa. And one Sunday night, Mike, my brother, said to me, "Hey, Muggs, how about we go up to Maniwaki?" Now, Maniwaki is a small community just north of the capital on the Quebec side. Why Maniwaki? Well, 3 really good reasons. My mother was born in Maniwaki, a small village in the Algonquin, which means Mary's land. She loved the place, and we, as children, always went up these windy Gatineau Hill roads, all the way up and to the many lakes and cottages our family had along the way. So it holds a lot of history for us and very precious memories. And one of the main reasons is that Mom asked to be buried there and Dad beside her many years ago. "Yes," I said, "Mike, let's do it." So we got in the car the following morning and off we went, right through Lower Town, Ottawa, across the Portage Bridge, over to the Quebec side, all the way up the hills into Highway 109. Passed through Chelsea with Confortune, it's the ski lodge, and through these towns that I remember as a child. Wakefield. Is the bakery still there, Mike? Yeah, still there, still pretty good too. And on we went up through Cajabajwa, Bouchette, all the way up to Maniwaki. We were on Rue Principale because, of course, it's Quebec and the streets are all named in French. I said, "There's Aunt Frances and Uncle Frank's home. It looks exactly the same." He said, "It's like a time warp, isn't it?" So we kept on and turned on Rue Larocque, and over by the steeple, we knew we were headed in the right direction because Mom and Dad are buried in the parish cemetery. We turned on to the dirt road and we headed down. I was actually fluttery with excitement. I'm going to go visit Mom and Dad with my brother. That's very cool. We hadn't been together, all 4 of us, in a very, very long time. And then I saw it. The chain link fence. Oh. And as soon as he parked the car, I jumped out and ran to the fence. It was about my height, with 2 great gates right in the middle with an immense padlock locking the 2 large gates. Mike joined me later and said, "What? I have been up here so many times and these gates are never shut and they're never locked." And I clung to the chain links. No, I haven't come all this way and not be able to visit Mom and Dad? And Mike said, okay, let's not panic here. and I stuck my left foot up into one of the links. Mike, get over here. He said, what? And I said, get over here. I need your help. He said, no. I said, yes, I'm not staying on this side. Mom and Dad are on that side. Just give me a hand with the right leg. He said, well, what do you mean give you a hand? I said, just lift it up. Fortunately, I had pants on and flat shoes. Just lift it up, hoist it up. Come on. I just need a little bit. Okay, give me a little boost up. And he did. He shoved me up, and I got to the top of that fence, one leg dangling on one side, the other on the other. And you know when that flash comes through your head and think, this may not have been a good idea? And that was just very brief. And the other leg came over, and I landed on both feet, and I turned to face him with, ta-da! He was nowhere to be found. Mike, right here, look. There seems to be a little gate that I can walk right through. Did you know about that before? And he never answered. But to this day, I can still hear my mother laughing. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I always thought it was more likely that people were trying to get out of the graveyard than in. Our next teller is Jennifer Ferris, and I have heard this story once before. And Marva and I, when we were thinking about crimes and misdemeanors, when we found out that Jennifer was willing to tell this story on this occasion, we thought, good, it's good to go then. Jennifer is going to be hosting our next Stories at Fern Street in Victoria on October the 16th at 7:30, live or on Zoom. And she will also be doing on the November Around Town Tellers. She and another of her students with improv are going to be doing an improv story there. She's just put on a workshop about that. One of the many different workshops she does, as well as the memoir writing and general writing. So we'll bring Jennifer back with this wonderful story. I'm so glad that you were here to hear it. Thanks.
Well, thank you for inviting me to tell, and thank you to Lee for, as always, a wonderful job as an MC. Almost makes you want to run up onto the stage, the way she presents us. But I want to talk about something different. My mother and I had a very difficult relationship. She was unpredictable. Now, there were periods of sunshine, but always the threat of thunder. My teenage years were very difficult, and I take some of the blame myself. But by the time I got to 17 and a half, there was a glimmer of the future, a future relationship with my mother where we could get on as adults. But just after my 18th birthday, my mother died. And so that opportunity was snatched away from me. And I put my mother in a box on a shelf at the back of my mind and closed the lid. About 30 years later, my eldest son, Hal, said to me, I don't know anything about your mother. I don't even know what my grandmother's name is. You put other family members in stories, but you never mention her. No, I don't. But it set me thinking, and I lifted the lid on the box, and I let my mother out. At first, I just allowed her as a to have a bit part in some of my stories, but then I began to create some stories about her. And this is the first story that I told about my mother, Beryl. It's a dull, damp August afternoon, and my mum is lifting me, not up into her arms for a warm embrace, but but so she can hold me high above her head, that I would be able to gain access to a small bathroom window that's open. I'm 6 years old, and this is my first break and enter. Mum was an old hand. I think it started in World War II. My dad was in Africa fighting fascism, and Mum was at home fighting boredom. She was living in a sort of communal arrangement with my older sister, who was a baby, her mother, my grandmother, Lily, my uncle Stephen, my mother's brother, his wife, Auntie V, and their 2 children. Yes, there were advantages of living communally with other people. There was always someone to talk to, jobs were shared, but it was so cramped, so noisy, never a moment's peace. And the dirty diapers soaking in the bucket, and the ever-present stink of overcooked cabbage seeping into every corner of the house. And there wasn't much money. So, as the old saying goes, they made their own fun. On Sunday afternoons, my mother, Uncle Stephen, and Auntie V left the 3 children with my grandmother, and they took a picnic up on the downs, you know, those beautiful rolling chalk-filled hills that border the south coast of England. They were there for the entertainment. It was the time of the Battle of Britain. Small planes, Allied planes, flown by enthusiastic young men met with small enemy planes, flown by enthusiastic young men, and they met overhead and tried to shoot one another out of the sky. There was a lot of dipping and diving and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. My mother and her brother and Auntie V, of course, were cheering for the Allies. Every so often, an enemy plane would get sick of the nip and tuck of battle overhead and would swoop down and strafe the observers that he knew were not cheering for him. I said to my mother, "What did you do?" "Oh, I dove into a bush." "What kind of bush protects you from machine gun fire?" They were living in a small village right on the outskirts of Portsmouth, which is a big naval base in the south of England, and it attracted a lot of bombing attention. Every so often, an enemy plane would go off course, and probably didn't mean to, but dropped his payload on residential areas. The wealthier neighbours decided to move to a part of England that was safer. I don't want you to think that they made careful plans, constructed long lists. No, for many of them, it was as if they made the decision at breakfast. There was a sound of the scrape of chairs being pushed back from the table, the slam of the front door, and the snarl of the car engine as it drove off into the distance. They left behind them houses with food on the table, the radio playing, and the kettle cooling on the hob. All those landlocked Marie Celestes calling out for attention. So my mum and Auntie V, a woman of great beauty and adventure, would leave the children with my grandmother. "We're going for a walk, a long walk on the downs," they would say. No, they weren't. They were going to indulge their new pastime, breaking into houses. I'm not sure how they chose their victims. There must have been some forward-thinking reconnaissance. They chose places surrounded by large gardens with big shrubs growing around the house to conceal their activities. I don't know why mother, and Auntie V didn't move away from that area where it was so dangerous with enemy bombing. But then it was dangerous, and they liked that. So they decided they would break into these houses, and they gained access, a loosely latched window, a small operation with a screwdriver. Once they were in, they made the house their own. They would walk through the main rooms of the ground floor, passing comment, sometimes not complimentary, on the choice of colours, curtains, cushions. And then they'd go upstairs to the main bedroom, open up the wardrobe, the closet, and try on all the clothes, men's and women's. My mother would sit at one of those kidney-shaped dressing tables with the big mirror at the back, and she would primp and preen, puff of perfume, bit of lippy, rouge. And then they would remember that they were hungry. They were always hungry during the war. So they'd go downstairs to the kitchen. There was always something, loose tea leaves in the tea tin, a package of stale biscuits, a can of sardines, if they were lucky, a slice of last year's Christmas cake. They'd put everything on a tray and go into the big living room, drawing room, the one with the French windows, those French doors that would open out into the garden. And they would sit back in comfy chintz-covered chairs, put a record on the record player, and they would sip their tea and eat their dainties to the beautiful music of Glenn Miller and his band. And then, of course, it was time to go home, so they put everything away and left. I don't think they stole anything. There were no unexpected, unexplained treasures in our house. My mother didn't even have an engagement ring. Of course, they could have fenced the stuff, but where was the money? There were all those stories of poverty, of rationing powdered eggs, whale meat instead of beef. Each week they would bake a cake with whatever ingredients they had, and as the week progressed, the slices would get thinner and thinner and thinner until it was time to go to the store and buy new rations. No, I think that my mother and Auntie V were making up for something that had slipped out of their lives. Before the war, Auntie V was a small plane pilot. She ferried goods back and forth across the country. At the beginning of the war, my mother trained to be an ambulance driver, but marriage and children came in between, and it seemed as if excitement, romance, and adventure were details in somebody else's life. At the end of the war, people either moved back or the houses were sold. And my mother really should have stopped. But break and enter is a hard habit to well break. So she was a sensible woman most of the time, and she decided she would restrict her activities to empty houses. Houses that didn't sell, or a house where the previous owner has gone and the new owner has not yet arrived. When my sister was big enough, she and my mother would disappear for the afternoon. Once or twice a month, my dad and I knew exactly what they were up to. I was born in 1950, so from the ages of 6 to 11, I was very useful when gaining access to an empty house. So here we are, my first time, and Mom is lifting me up, 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 high overhead, and I'm reaching out my hands to grasp the sill of a small bathroom window that's open. I sit astride, just like Margaret, on that fence. Now, a callous mother might not care where her child landed. You can imagine the scene, the wee one hanging onto the window frame, and the mum shouting, "Jump, jump!" But my dear old mother, on her good days, would always make sure that there was a little counter or a wash basin that I could drop into before I went down to the ground. Now, of course, I'm alone in the house, and it's my job to find a way to get the others in. Now, window fastenings and locks were so much simpler in those days, in the 1950s. I could lever up the little handle on the window, sometimes with two hands. If it was too stiff, then I had instructions to go into either the kitchen door or the French doors in the dining room, because their locks were always so basic. And Mum had made me practice. Slide the bolt, turn the key. Slide the bolt, turn the key. Slide the bolt, turn the key. It never once occurred to me that I would get stuck in the house, because I knew that my mum or my older sister, who was 8 years older than me and very sensible, would find a way to get me out. Well, at last, I opened up the French doors, the kitchen door, the window, whatever, and let in my mother, my sister, and two of my mother's friends who'd just come along for a bit of afternoon entertainment. Once we were in the house, Mum would start to walk through the empty rooms, furnishing them with whims of imagination and whimsy. It's not the same, she said. It's not the same when the houses are empty. But I loved these empty houses, the way they echoed as Mum and I ran through the empty rooms down the hallways, singing at the tops of our voices, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies." Adventure, romance, illicit pleasure, all rolled into one perfect afternoon. I know what you're thinking, but I don't do that anymore. My children are too big, and I am old. But I do have grandchildren. Lily, 9 years old, her brother, 4, not quite ready. But if all else failed, there's the 2-year-old coming along. And those kids, they love to climb and jump and run and sing. People say, I have my grandchildren quite a bit at my house. What do you do with them? Oh, we have such fun. We chop tiny strawberries with large, sharp knives. We climb trees. We jump off walls. I don't do that part anymore. We play with matches and candles on rainy afternoons. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
You see what I mean? What a great coach, eh? Yes. Now, this story comes from a short story by Al Newson called An Easy Score. If it's true, I don't know. Only Al would know. The two men watching the doors of the bank noticed Mrs. Hartman. They noticed that she was old. She looked frail. She was clasping an oversized bag very tightly with both hands. They began to follow her. Then they saw that she turned off the busy street and onto a deserted residential street. They looked at each other. An easy score, they thought. They followed her away from the street, and then each went up on one side of her. The one on the left tripped her. The one on the right cut the strap of her purse and grabbed onto it. Unlike their other victims, Mrs. Hartman did not drop the purse and put her hands out to stop herself from falling. No, she clutched onto it with all her might, and when she hit the sidewalk, there was a sound of a bone breaking. Well, the one who's grabbing the purse was yanking and yanking, and his comrade at every time was kicking her with his square-toed shoes. But she was fiercely holding on. She got kicked and yanked, kick, yank, kick, yank. Now, she could not have defeated even one, and there were two. So eventually she lost consciousness and lost her grip. So they grabbed that purse and ran. They were long gone by 15 minutes later when somebody found her lying unconscious on the sidewalk and called an ambulance and the police. And as the ambulance attendants were lifting her up into the ambulance, she looked up and saw the policeman's face. And she said, "They stole my purse. It had all my money in it. It's all gone." And the policeman said, "How much money was in your purse, ma'am?" There was a pause. She said, $33,000. And then she lost consciousness. Well, By the time she was coming out of emergency after being treated, there were 4 police officers, 4 detectives, and as many newspaper, radio, television reporters there as well, as word had spread. Detective Sergeant McKendrick was the one who spoke to her. And there she was. She had a cast on one arm, a cast on a leg, her head wrapped up, her face swollen and bruised. And he said to her, "Ma'am, why is it that you had so much money in your purse?" And she said, "Oh, I'm a foolish, foolish old woman, and now I've lost it all. Once a year, sometimes twice, I go to the bank and I take out all my money in cash, and I take it home, and I look at it, and I feel it, and I put it in stacks, and I count it. And then I take it back and put it back into the bank. And now it's gone." And he said, "Did you recognize the person who took it?" She said, "There were 2, and I had never seen them before, and I don't know if I would recognize them even now." And then she began to drift off with the anesthetic. The next day, Sergeant McKendrick appeared again, but he was a different demeanor entirely. His face was red. He looked angry. He looked like an angry bear stomping in there. And he demanded to see her, but she was asleep, and the doctor said, "No, you're not waking her up. If you want to see her, you'll have to come back tomorrow." And so he did. He came back the next day, calmer. And she was sitting up in bed, and there was a young volunteer, high school type age volunteer, reading the newspaper to her. And he asked the volunteer to leave. And he said to her, "Why did you lie to me?" "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Why did you lie to me? You said there was $33,000. I went to the bank to get the serial numbers to match them up if they should show up anywhere. And they said, you don't even have an account with that bank. You come to that bank once a month and cash your Social Security check, just like you did the day before yesterday. Why did you lie to me?" There was a pause, and she said, "I didn't want them to get away with it. I wanted them to pay for what they did to me." And he said, "But you didn't have to lie. We would have done the same investigating if it was for your Social Security check." And there was a long pause. And he thought about what he had said to her, and he was embarrassed. Because when there was $33,000, there was 4 detectives. There was all the press. It had been spread on all the newspapers and radio, the story of this. Now there was only him. And he knew when he walked out of there, he'd be going back to the detachment and putting it on the pile of unsolved crimes. And she said, Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound that way. I know that you policemen work really hard at when you're investigating." And he felt even more embarrassed that here was this old lady who'd been beaten up, lost even her Social Security money, and she was looking after his feelings more than he'd even thought of hers. So he said, "Well, we'll just let it go." And he said goodbye, and off he went. And then the young volunteer came into the room and said, "Would you like me to read some more to you?" And she said, "Yes." "Yes, dear. Read the one about the murders." She said, "But I've read that 4 times already." She said, "Yes, dear, I know you have, but please read it again." And so the volunteer read, "At 10:15 yesterday night, police were called to an apartment at 370 7th Avenue. As a result of neighbors. They had reported a very loud argument between the 2 men who were roommates there. Then, silence. The police officers went in and they saw the 2 men lying dead in the living room, each of them with knives in their hands. Obviously, the police concluded that the young men had killed each other in this fight. The neighbors reported that the argument, which got louder and louder during the day, was each of the men accusing the other of stealing a large amount of money from each other, $33,000. The police are not looking for any other suspects, and the public is not in danger. Their names are being withheld pending notification of their next of kin. Both men have extensive records with the police. Mrs. Hartman smiled and said again softly, "Read it again, please." And it should be like that. So our last teller to close out, as she began the show, is Marva. And Marva's... What? Is there a cane around here?
No, it's okay. I don't need it to get to the stool. I need to find it before I leave.
So there's an upcoming show on the 27th of October in Parksville. And if you want to find the place and directions and such, or how to get a ticket, then just look up Storytelling Parksville, and you'll find it.
No, just when I go to leave.
Just to keep the crowds in line.
Well, thank you, Lee. It's been a pleasure to tell here today. And for our last story, this story was actually written by a woman, an Ottawa author by the name of Janet Tunn. And it was published in a book called Menopause is Murder. It's a book with all sorts of wonderful murder stories. This story she wrote about a couple, Bert and Louise. She wrote it in the third person. I have taken the liberty of rewriting it into the first person, and I'm going to take the part of Louise. It's called Lemon Meringue Pie. I sat straight up in bed. I looked over at the illuminated alarm clock, and it was midnight. Only midnight. Where was the Sandman when you needed him? I lay back, moaning, grabbing my stomach because it was in such pain. And I began to curse all writers of diet books, especially the latest one by Y.B. Fat, that's fat with two T's, called The Happy Dieter. He says that the pain, hunger pain will go away, the pounds will melt off, exercise is fun, and all diet writers, including this writer of The Happy Dieter, they're all liars and frauds. I lay back in my bed thinking, I have got to get over these hunger pangs. And I looked at Bert, who was laying next to me. Bert, who snored so badly that the whole house shook, and nothing woke him up. I looked at Bert, and I thought, why do I even care? Bert doesn't care. He tells me he likes me as a heftier handful. But I did promise Bert this time that he would not have to diet with me. No, I would continue to prepare his meals and bake twice a week. So while Bert ate fried chicken and buttered mashed potatoes, I got dry toast and salad. While he had cakes and pies, I ate apples. I was so frustrated. And then I thought to myself, I will get up and I will have one piece of bread, just one piece of bread. No butter, no jam, just bread. I swung my legs over to the side of the bed. Bert kind of rolled over a little bit. I sat there quietly, and then he began his snoring that shook the house. And then I quietly got up, and I walked to the top of the stairs. I quietly went down those stairs. And when I got to the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the kitchen, a light came on in my kitchen. It was the light from the refrigerator. I thought, oh, that's strange. And then I looked into the kitchen, and there by the back door, I saw the only thing I owned that had any value. It was a sterling silver tea service that my aunt had given us for a wedding present. But I also saw the DVD player and the TV. I thought, are we being burgled? And then I heard a voice from the kitchen, and I thought, oh, he's still here. And he was saying, food. Lots of food. Obviously, he had seen what was in the refrigerator. And then I heard the drawer open with the cutlery. I heard the jangle of cutlery. I heard the drawer with the dishes open. I heard a dish being taken down and set on the table. I heard a pan being slid across the table. I heard a chair being pushed up to the table. I do wonder what's going on. And then it turned out his back was to the door to the kitchen, so I could go forward and take a look. What I saw was this spindly little man dressed in dirty coveralls and a torn t-shirt. And he was going, oh, what wonderful food. And then I saw that he was eating the lemon meringue pie, the one that I had made for Bert, and I had not even had a taste of it. And then I thought, this should not be difficult. I easily have 50 pounds on this man. He has his back to me, so I have the element of surprise. All I need is a weapon. And then I looked over, and Y.B. Fat's Happy Dieter, thick book, was sitting there, and I could reach in and grab it. I reached in, and I grabbed that book, and I thought, that's my pie. You don't get any of my pie. And then, with a giant warrior yell, I hollered, wah! And I ran into the kitchen and I dumped the book right on top of him. And he fell to the floor. And I was about to whomp him again when he looked at me with pained eyes. And then the eyes emptied, and there was nothing. So I went to the kitchen drawer, and I got out the twine that I used to truss the turkey. And I had lots of time. I tied him up really well, trussed him up really well. And then I called 911. I thought, I wonder if I should wake up Bert and let him know what's happening. But quite frankly, Bert is so hard to wake up that by the time he finally woke up, everything would all be done. So I would just leave it. And then I sat down and I ate all of the lemon meringue pie. I made 2 decisions while I was doing that. First, I would tell Bert the burglar ate the pie, and then I would get rid of every diet book in my house, with one exception. I would keep one by my bedstead in case of emergencies. Thank you.
Well, all of that exercise and cowing of burglars has given me more strength to do this stuff, just to, in case. Anyway, so that's the end of the stories we have for you today, and now it's my pleasure on your behalf and ours to thank Longevity John and Ted Cadillac for this honor, for this opportunity to tell our stories here, and on your behalf to thank the tellers, Jennifer, Margaret, Marva, and me, thank you for coming and joining us here, and those who are joining us online. Your time and your attention are gifts that we appreciate. We love to share what we love. And so thank you for letting us do this. And I just have to say, of all the places that I tell stories, I love this theater the best. This is so great. So this isn't the end for Duncan. No, no, no. On October 22nd, in the evening that time at 7 p.m., we have another lineup of storytellers as well. And hopefully we'll see some of you there. And us again. Until then, so long and stay dry.
So she's going to sing along on this one. This is called Brother. I need to get back to the place I was when the river was dry and I walked it alone. In a place that's so quiet, where Alaska runs, where we chase our freedom at the rising sun. And oh, I got myself lost. And oh, when the good gets twisted, nothing comes. I need a brother to hold me up. When you come to me, I promise I won't lie. Promise I won't turn you away. When you come to me, I promise I won't lie. I promise I won't. Sick and tired of this feeling dragging me down. Sometimes I burst in a fire. Hey, I'm trying. And I know that we're all like the trails of stars in flight. One day you burn. Oh, I got myself lost. Oh, when the good gets twisted, nothing comes. to me, I promise I won't lie. I promise I won't turn you away. When you come to me, I promise I won't lie. I promise I won't turn you away. Oh, 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 oh. When you come to me, I promise I won't lie. I promise I won't turn you away. Ooh, when you come to me, I promise I won't lie. I promise I won't turn you away. One more time. When you come to me, I promise I won't.